Good afternoon, all. So first of all, we will be in Israel for the next few weeks. So today I'm first going to record Parshat Ekev, and then either immediately afterwards or after a bit, I will record Re'eh and Shoftim. So please just listen at your leisure. But note that I will be recording basically the next three Parsha discussions. First the one for this week, and then one for the following 2 weeks. Okay. Secondly, you can access this on my Facebook account or on Melrose B'nai Israel Facebook account. I put it up on mine first and then share it to them. And the discussions will be released at whatever point they deem appropriate. So this week, the title of our discussion is Parshat Ekev, the hard work of maintaining relationships. As we discussed last week, there are many candidates for the most important verses, thoughts, or teachings in the Torah. I often ask students of various ages the following question. If you could choose only one of the Aseret HaDibrot to base an entire society on, which one would it be? While different individual dictates are chosen, the point is made in the lesson that any one of them would suffice for all of them to have implicit elements. In each of these commandments, we find God's voice. We find how we relate to God. We find implications for how we relate to each other, and we find actionables that will further this relationship for the betterment of all. While it may seem easy or obvious to choose that verse for you, let's not be glib about this. We are talking about a relationship here, and relationships require hard, ongoing work if they are to thrive and continue. That is the focus of this week's discussion. Dr. Deborah Cabanas, MD, writes as follows. The other day I saw a couple in my office. They'd been having a hard time and came to couples therapy to try to help their marriage survive. 2 kids, 2 jobs, 5 years of marriage, and they both feel they're not getting what they need and want out of the relationship. He needs his time alone. She wants constant togetherness. She hates cooking. He says home-cooked meals make him feel loved. Over weeks and months, they've been working hard at it, venturing far from their respective comfort zones to try to understand what the other member in this relationship needs and wants. And it's paying off. They are happier and more hopeful about their relationship than they have been in years. But as they were getting their stuff together, ready to leave the session, she stopped, looked at me, and said, I just want to ask you something. This is taking a lot of hard work. I'm working at it. He's working at it. Are we always going to have to work this hard? This is the question I always want people to ask, the one that holds the key. The simple answer is yes. Good relationships take hard work. Sustaining a relationship over years is not for the faint of heart. You can't be lazy about it or dial it in. That doesn't mean that it can't be joyful, life-affirming, satisfying, and fun. But the trade-off is that it takes work. Our Parsha begins with one of our if-then clauses that we've spoken about before. V'haya Ekev tishma'un et hamishpatim ha'elu shmartam v'asitem otam. And it will be because you, Ekev, because you have held on and you hear and you listen to these ordinances and keep them and perform, that God will keep the covenant and the kindness that God swore to your forefathers. Haya Ekev tishma'un. We know that word Ekev. Yaakov. Heal. Heeding. Hold yourself by. And we are taught consistently, especially throughout Devarim, that it's really important to not see any mitzvah as being minor, as being superfluous, as being not needed, as being something that one can summarily say, I'm not going to do that because it doesn't count. Not so. Again, we may not understand why all the pieces are in the puzzle as God put it together, but they are, in fact, all there. Nothing is insignificant in what God asks of us. We are to work at maintaining all of it. And this is the hard part of our relationship with God. Verse 13. God will love you and bless you, and will multiply you, and will bless your fruit of your womb, and your soil, and your grain, and your wine, the offspring of your cattle, and so on, which God swore to give to your forefathers. You will be blessed above all people. All people will be able to have children, and God will remove from you all illness and evil diseases of Egypt, which you knew. And you will be successful in your interactions with all others. So here we have the positive conditional clause that one might hope would formulate the relationship. But while the tendency may be to look at the then clause, you say to your child, if you finish your dinner, you get dessert. Child, here's dessert. To maintain one's expectations accordingly, one must remember the relational commitment that the if clause imparts. You must do the first part to receive the reward. This is repeated again at the beginning of chapter 7 and in other places as well. Kol ha-mitzvah asher anochi mitzavcha hayom tishmurun la'asot lama'an tichayu uribitem uvatem v'yirshtem et ha'aretz asher nishba Hashem le'avotecha. Every commandment, kol ha-mitzvah, every one of the commandments, all are important, that I command you this day you will keep, so that you may live and multiply, and come and possess the land that God swore to your forefathers. Again, every mitzvah. What seems big, what may not seem so big. This is the hard work. And further, we must choose every day to do that hard work, as the couple did in that scenario in the beginning. This is fundamental to our understanding of our relationship with God. And every interaction and every involvement that ensues from that, including our involvement with each other, because we're also commanded regarding that. Rambam in Hilchot Shuvah has a lot to say about our choosing to do all of this. He talks about bechira chavshit, free will. This is the providence of man, of the human being, of us as individuals in the world. Rambam teaches, free will is granted to all persons. If one desires to turn one's self onto a path of good and be righteous, the choice is his. Similarly, when one decides to do evil and be wicked, the choice is his. This is the intent of the Torah's statement back in chapter 3, verse 22 of Bereshit, of Genesis. Behold, man has become unique as ourselves, knowing good and evil. Once the human being, the earthling, ate from the tree of knowledge. The human species became singular in this world with no other species, no other created entity resembling it in this quality, that the human being can, on one's own initiative, with one's knowledge and thought, know good and evil, and do what one chooses to do with that knowledge. There is no one who can prevent that person from doing good or evil. Therefore, it's very nice to blame the snake. It's very nice for Adam to blame Eve. But as we look at this in toto, as Moshe is going to die and is ready to send off the future generations to confront new experiences and new adventures, they are being reminded, here are the commandments. You are commanded to do them. If you do them, you will get this reward. If you don't, these will be the consequences. Rambam then goes on and explains, a person should not buy into the notion held by others in our world that at the time of creation, the Holy One, blessed be God, decreed whether each person would be righteous or wicked. This is untrue. Each person makes choices for their own, to be righteous like this one or to be wicked like that one. There is no one who compels the individual one way or the other. Rather, this is our own initiative and decision. And elsewhere in the Gemara, we learn that God makes us the way God makes us. Our color of eyes, our height, our certain capacities that we have, certain physical capabilities. But how we choose to use them, that is on us. This idea of free choice is also connected to our ability to do tshuva, to repent, to try to be better. Why do we keep repeating throughout Devarim and in so many places in the Torah. You must do these things, and then this will be your reward. Because you have to remind, just like the parent has to remind the child who's crying. I didn't say you couldn't have dessert. What I said was you must eat your dinner first, and then you may have dessert. We will now read in Devarim, chapter 11, verse 26. Behold, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. The choice is in your hands. And by repeating all of this in Devarim, we continue to amplify the notion that the hard work of relationships, of maintaining it, is in our hand. If we fulfill the if clause and do everything we're supposed to, God will still be with us. Further along in our Parsha, in Parshat, we come to the following piece of text. Guard yourself so you don't forget the Lord your God, so that you don't act like you forget by not keeping God's commandments, God's ordinances, God's statutes, which I command you this day. You will eat, you will be sated, you will have good houses, you will dwell, your herds will go, your flocks will multiply. But your hearts at that time could grow haughty. And we're going to see this in Parshat Shoftim, in Parshat A and Shoftim after this. And you will forget that the Lord your God has brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. That it was God who led you through the great and awesome desert where snakes and vipers and scorpions and drought and there was no water, and God brought you water. God fed you with manna. But you say to yourself, my strength, the might of my hand, is what has accumulated this wealth for me. That's when the relationship breaks down. You have a relationship with your partner, with your parent, with somebody who's significant to you, with your child, whoever it is, a very good friend. And you know that you each put that work into the relationship. When you look at yourself and you look at what you have, and you say, I did this myself. Nobody helped me. Nobody was there. That's where the relationship falls apart, and one becomes haughty and full of self-pride. As it says in the Pasuk, and you will say in your heart, I did this myself, by my own power, by my own strength. But the very next verse says, you have to remember God, because it was God who gave you the strength to make wealth, to establish God's covenant. And it will be, if you forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and worship them and bow down before them, I bear witness, you will perish. Oved Tavdun. Pitfalls are always parts of relationships. There are misunderstandings. People will assume credit for someone else's doing. There will be lack of compassion for the position of the other, and so much more. This is not different. People are people. And the Bnei Yisrael are warned excessively about not taking undue credit, not to forget God or what God has done for them, and to attribute their good fortune appropriately to God. Precisely for this reason, by doing and remembering the source of the mitzvot, we are doing the hard work on our part of our relationship with God, and then hoping that God will respond. V'ata Yisrael, ma Hashem Elokecha she'al mi'amah. Now Israel, what does God ask from you? That you should have all for God, that you should walk in God's ways, that you should love God, and you should worship God with all your heart, with all your soul, and to keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day, l'tovlach, for your good. Make no mistake about it. This is not an easy task. It is intended to keep us humble and to ensure that we continue to have gratitude. All of this leads up to a part of our Parsha very familiar to those of us that daven daily. Let us consider it now. It goes with what we read last week in Vet Hanan, the Shema. And let us look at it with new intentionality and understanding as we consider the context in which it appears. Namely, this is the second paragraph of the Shema, as most of us read it. V'hayayim shema tishma'un et mitzvotai asher nochi mitzavet techem hayom la'ahavat Hashem Elokeichem lefto b'chol v'b'chmo b'chol nafshechem. V'natati mitar etzechem b'ito yareh makush v'chasafta tiganecha v'tirashchem yitzarecha v'natati esef v'sadecha l'necha v'achalta v'savata. Hishamru lachem pen yifteh levavechem v'sartem v'avadetem Elohim achavim v'shtachvet lehem. And it will be that you must listen to my commandments, which I command you this day, to love your God, to serve God with all your heart, with all your soul. When you do that, God responds. Remember the formulation of the contract, statements of the parties to the contract, God and the Bnei Yisrael, what we will do, then what God will do. This paragraph is the paragraph of the hard relationship. You listen, God will give you rain at its due time. You will gather your grain, your wine, your oil, and God will give us grass. Our livestock will be well. We will eat and be sated. But if your heart is misled, remember hubris, I did this myself, the sun god did it, whatever the neighbors say, and you turn away and you worship strange gods and you bow down before them, then v'charaf Hashem, the anger of God will be kindled against you. God will close the heavens. There will be no rain. The ground will not give you its yield, and you will perish quickly from the good land that God gives you. I just want to point out ancillarily, again, this is Shemitah year. We're coming up towards its closing, but we understand that we have to act appropriately. And we have to treat the land with respect, and we have to treat each other with respect, and we have to remember that we're all part of this much, much larger ecosystem and system of humanity. You will set these words on your heart, on your soul, and we repeat from what we already said in the first paragraph. They will be a sign upon your hand and between your eyes. Otam et b'nechem, and you will teach them to your children to speak of them when you're lying down in your house and when you wake up to go on your way and when you rest and when you rise. One little interesting point, the first paragraph is generally written in the singular. This paragraph is written for the Amcha in the plural. So we're accommodating both the relationship between God and myself individually, God and the entirety of the Bnei Yisrael, and my being a member of the Bnei Yisrael. All of that is incorporated here when we're describing what goes into this relationship. And you will write them upon the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. And again, we bop back and forth between the individual and the plural voice, because all, again, the individuals included, the collective is seen as a joint individual and then individual parts. Then your days will increase, the days of your children, on the land which God swore to give to your forefathers as the days of heaven above the earth. A lot of this sentiment is evoked in a pasuk that many of us know from Micha, chapter 6, verse 8. Hiki lecha adam ma tov u'ma Hashem daresh mimecha ki im asot mishpat v'ahavat chesed u'tznei lechem im elokecha. What does God ask for you? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Remember that all of us are part of this connection. Well, we have just established the relationship between our acknowledgement of God through deeds and God's response through the bestow of gifts of what we need to survive. Nechama Leibowitz, Zichrono L'Shalom, explains for us why and how Moshe is recounting the exact nature of the relationship with the Bnei Yisrael and God through specifically what she dubs as the manna test, also referred to in our Parshat. Nehemiah teaches as follows. Chapter 8, verse 2 through 3 and 16. And you should remember the long trek which the Lord your God led you these 40 years, that God tested you in your heart, whether you would keep God's commandments or not. And God afflicted you and suffered you and fed you with manna. And you were tested for your faith. Who fed you in the wilderness with manna? Both in our Sidra and Exodus, from which this text is repeated, the manna is described as nisayon, as a test or a trial for Israel. Our commentators, and this is still Nehemiah's teaching, have remarked on the unusual nature of this trial. Usually a test or a trial is something to be borne, an unpleasant experience or a burdensome duty. Abravanel asks as follows. What test was implied in the provision of the daily bread in the form of manna, with a double portion on Shabbat Eve? Certainly this was a great kindness, rather than a test. Rashi explains that in Exodus, where the Almighty announces the sending of the manna, it says, I will put them to the test, whether they will walk in my law or not. So where does this apply? Stepping out of Nehemiah's teaching for a moment. Remember, one has everything they need, one is sated, one says, I did this. You forget the circumstances that brought you to where you are. Different points I've been asked by people, how do I mourn my parents and how do I give them the kavod that I'm supposed to give them if they were not the best parents? So I answer, I go, first of all, I believe everybody is the best human being they can be. And secondly, they gave you life and God approved it. So God must have found them worthy. That's a little bit glib, but it's actually not too far off. We have to acknowledge that everything is not going to be easy, and having everything easy is not the test of the strength of a relationship. It's often in difficulties that relationships are tested and their mettle is confirmed. So Nehemiah continues. The test was not in the gift of the manna, but rather in the instructions accompanying it. When the Israelites honored these instructions, they would serve as a pointer to their loyalty to God, to see whether or not they will walk in the way of God. By the same token, every precept in the Torah can be termed a test or a trial. We may detect, however, in the wording of this text that the trial had nothing to do with the instructions regarding the manna, but rather with the actual enjoyment of the heavenly food. In other words, would you still give credit to God? Would you recognize it? Would you have gratitude? Or would you complain, which is ultimately what happens, by the way? The life of luxury and ease they would enjoy in virtue of the manna would actually be the greatest trial of all. Think about in our society how many people who win the lottery, and then it is not the resolution to their problems, but it's the destruction of their life because they don't know how to handle it. Can we handle that life of luxury and ease and still remember and be humble and show humility in terms of our understanding of ourselves and where we fit into the picture? Back to Nehemiah. In other words, would the Israelites continue to fear God and keep God's commandments in times of prosperity? The situation in which the Israelites were placed regarding the manna represented a great trial for them, since they entered a desert without any food or any sort of any kind of sustenance and no way out. They were totally dependent on the daily portion of manna which rained down and melted in the heat of the sun. It didn't stay from day to day. Every day they were going to get another batch from God. They hungered for it greatly, and they bore their suffering in obedience to God, who might have led them through an uninhabited route to teach them. However, we know about their failures as well. Nachmanides maintained that the manna constituted a trial for the Israelites owing to its unusual nature. Neither they nor their fathers had known it. They never heard the story about it. It was an unpopular, strange food, which was not given to them in any abundance above their current needs. It could not be stored. It would go bad. And each day they were worried, are we going to have food today? Life has its vicissitudes, to be sure. We often state that it is easy to say yes to God when things are going well. It may even be easier to forget that all comes from God when things are going well. That is precisely Seforno's point. of having sustenance without suffering or effort is within itself a test. Our real test of faith is when things are not going the way we would like, and we acknowledge that this is the harder part of our work, of maintaining our relationship with God. One of the things we learn when we hear that somebody has died, we bless God. May God bless you amongst the mourners of Zion and Yerushalayim. When we hear something that's difficult, we say Gam Zu Latov. This also must have some kind of positive purpose. It's not easy. It's not easy to not lose faith. But this is the hard work of the relationship with God. In this pensive season, as we run up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the Aseret Yemei Teshuvot, may we all consider that relationship seriously and commit ourselves to doing the hard work to sustain it. Shabbat Shalom.